Well, welcome back to our discussion on leadership. You becoming a master leader by following Jesus, the master who was a leader. And again, just to emphasize this, whether you're a Christian, a pre-Christian, a post-Christian, looking at Jesus as a leader is good for every leader because no leader has come close to the influence that he had on humanity. So we're going to approach this not merely as a Christian would, but looking at it as just the principles of leadership. And today we're talking about mission. Finally, we get to real leadership. That's what a lot of people think. Your mission, that's what it's all about. It's about your mission. It's about accomplishing a mission. Not necessarily. I think mission is critical, but it's not priority. Your priority is identity and vision. And all I'm going to say today, here's the key of this entire lesson. Whatever you do, wherever you go, wherever you take people, whatever you're leading, your primary task is the key thought of this lesson. The primary task of every leader is reproducing leaders. It's about people, not programs. So having said that, what distracts most leaders from mission accomplishment? I'm going to suggest three things. First, we race to mission without identifying our personal identity and the vision, our preferred future. And if you don't know who you are, and if you don't know where you're going, it's going to be impossible for you to successfully get others there. That's number one. Number two, often leaders have a preference for philosophy over action. And I find this particularly true of pastors. Now, you might be a CEO, you might be a coach, you might be a teacher, but if you're a pastor, your training in seminary taught you to prefer thinking over action. And we just study philosophy. Okay, we call it theology, but the reality is we're thinking about thinking and thinking about truth and ideas. As important as ideas are, and listen, I can still wear my professor hat sometimes. I think that good thinking has to precede good mission. Otherwise, you get distracted. But often leaders stay there in thinking and don't actually get to the action of rolling out how we're going to get our mission accomplished. A second thing that goes against preachers is we are primarily judged, week by week by week, primarily judged on our sermons, where we talk about things rather than actually go out and do things. So many, I'd say the majority of sermons don't have a specific takeaway that here's an action item that you can do as you walk out the room. Now, my prejudice against those action items is simple. As a thinker, and I prefer thinking, I'll just be honest, my natural bent is to stay in that philosophic world, the idea world. Let's talk about all the possibilities before we actually go do something. That's a mistake. My prejudice against action points is that with any message, I can think of 5 or 10 things that I should do, let alone all the things that you should do. And I often prefer to let other people determine the course of action based upon the philosophy or the thinking that I've laid out. That is a mistake because typically people aren't that good at knowing specific steps to take on their faith journey. Here's an example. Yesterday, I was at lunch with a friend of mine. Here's a simple question for me. How do I get more out of reading the Bible? As I'm listening to myself talk, I just wanted to hit myself in the head with a hammer because I've had I'm in hundreds of different styles of Bible study, and I started going through, you could do this, or you could do this, and his eyes started to glaze over. And I said, okay, stop. Forget about everything that I just said. Start with James, read the book of James. 1 chapter a day for the next 5 days, underline 1 verse a day. That's all you get is 1 verse a day, and then go do that 1 verse. And he goes, oh, okay, I can do that. People don't need the whole vision. They need an action plan from a single step forward. And if you have people who prefer thinking over action, you are going to get sideways in your organization. So here's leadership, master leader principle number 5. It's easier to teach an action-oriented person to think than to convince a thinking person to act. If you have people that are good at thinking, it is hard to get them out of the room to actually go do something. Whereas if you have people who just, they want to go, 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 you can slow them down long enough to say, wait, think about this for a minute. They go, oh, okay, got it. Now, off they go. How do you know if your organization is filled with thinkers or filled with doers? I'm going to give you a couple of tests, and it all really revolves around meetings. How many meetings do you have? So I would look at the people who report to you. I would find out how many meetings you're going to every week and how long are each of those meetings. Now, if your meetings are over an hour, I can't imagine why any meeting should go over an hour, well, honestly, unless it's you have multiple things, even there, an hour's long meeting. I tend to keep my meetings to 30 minutes. Often I like 15-minute meetings because if you know how to do those 15-minute meetings, you can get everything done more quickly. Because you don't need to talk about everything. You need to figure out what to do to get stuff done. So look at your staff, count their meetings, add up the number of hours that they're in meetings, and then put a percentage to that of their work week. What percentage are they thinking and what percentage are they doing? And if they are thinking more than 10%, certainly more than 20%, if you're talking about, thinking about, planning about doing ministry or doing work or doing, exercising, whatever you're doing, you are thinking too much and acting too little. So another test is not just the percentage of time you spend in meetings, but are there action plans coming out of those meetings? Every person invited to a meeting should have one thing that they do after the meeting. If not, they're not needed at the meeting. Send them a memo to tell them what was discussed. But if I'm part of a meeting and I don't have something to do as a consequence, as a takeaway, as an action plan from that meeting, then I am wasting my time instead of getting stuff done. Let's get stuff done or we won't have a mission that is accomplished. A third thing that distracts us from our mission, and this is peculiar to pastors, so just talking to you pastors out there, we confuse the Great Commission with our mission. They are not the same thing. Going into all the world is God's mission. We're just joining Him, so co-mission. But our mission is going to be more idiosyncratic, more localized, and more determined by the resources at our disposal. And that is what I'd like to talk about for just a little bit. If you look at the last Great Commission, Matthew 28, 19 through 20a, it reads as follows. You know it, I'm sure. Go into all the world and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to observe everything that I have commanded you. It is pretty straightforward. What is interesting about that sentence is that there's 4 actions: go, disciple, baptize, and teach. Grammatically, only one of those is a verb. The rest are participles. And here's what that means. There's only one thing we're really commanded to do. Only one thing we're really commanded to do. The others are ways of getting that done. You know what the verb is? I'm sure you do. Make disciples. That is the mission. Make disciples. As we go, we can't make disciples if you don't go anywhere. You got to have people to go meet and make disciples. And then you baptize them. That's the initiation of a disciple. And a teaching is the maturing of a disciple. But all of it is about making disciples. Our priority in leadership is making disciples. It's not about the programs. It is about the people that we're training and raising up. And whether you're a coach, it's not about, yeah, you do win games. But more importantly, you're discipling people. As a teacher, you are delivering content, but more importantly, you're developing a human being. Even if you're a businessman, let's say you sell clothes. You're in the retail market for clothes. What are you doing? You're not selling clothes. You are draping a human being so they can feel their best and do their best and be their best. It is about people, not product. It is about people, not programs. Now, what does it mean then to make a disciple? Well, let's just make this clear. All of us should be discipling. All of it. Not all of us are CEOs, not all of us are presidents, not all of us are CFOs. All of us have influence. Every parent, every team member, every worker, every manager, we should all be discipling people who are under us and who are around us. That simply means, the Greek word is a learner. Now, careful. For us, a learner is someone who sits around and talks about stuff. We sit at a desk, the teacher lectures, we write stuff down, and we take tests. For a Jew, and of course this is a piece of Jewish literature, a learner was think of it as an apprentice, someone who is learning a craft, learning a skill. So instead of the word teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, I prefer the word training, or perhaps even better, coaching. And if we can, as preachers, begin to coach rather than preach, or train rather than teach, I think we'll get people closer to our mission. It's a biblical principle that applies to every CEO, every coach, every parent. So, what does it look like? Now, there are lots of different books on discipleship that give really helpful, practical tips on how to do it. This is not one of them. I am going to lean a little bit more into the philosophy side. I already told you I have a preference for that. I'm going to give you 3 principles of what it looks like to disciple someone. Again, whether you're a Christian, pre-Christian, post-Christian, this applies to everybody. Number 1, the discipleship principle is move from hearing to doing and from coming to going. What does that mean? Okay, here's where I came up with this. There are just a little bit over 200 uses of the word disciple in the New Testament, whether verb or noun. Interestingly, there's 27 books of the New Testament, every use of disciples in the first 5 books. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the book of Acts, that's the story of the early church. In other words, this is a Jesus word. This is what Jesus did with his disciples, and then in Acts, it's what his disciples did with their disciples. So that kind of puts it in perspective for us. If you think that discipleship is going to a coffee shop, opening your Bible, and teaching Scripture, you are wrong. Now, I can't even believe I just heard myself say that, because I'm like a Bible guy. For over 20 years, I was a Bible college professor teaching New Testament. I love this book. I love teaching this book. But can we just admit what Paul said is true? In 1 Corinthians chapter 8, he said, knowledge puffs up, love builds up. And so often, people who disciple by teaching the Bible, they teach people stuff. They think about stuff, but they don't go get stuff done. And our penchant needs to be for action, not for thinking. So, stage 1, if we're going to move from hearing to doing and from coming to going, I looked at all of these discipleship words of Jesus, and I discovered something interesting. Do you know how you exercise discipleship? Not talk about it, not think about it, but exercise it with 5 body parts. Your ears, your eyes, your mouth, your hands, and your feet. Ears, eyes, mouth, hands, feet. Those are the 5 body parts that actually exercise discipleship, and they come in pairs. 2 pairs, 3 stages. Stage number 1 of discipleship is eyes and feet. Jesus often said, come and see. Who are you, Jesus? Come and see. In order to be discipled, you have to have someone be where you are. They have to use their feet and move to where you are. And then they just use their eyes. They just watch. They watch what you do. They watch how you treat people. They watch how you live your life. That is the initial stage of discipleship. Come and see. Stage 2 of discipleship is the ears and the mouth. You listen. So as Jesus preaches, he talked about stuff, and then you have to go and talk about the same stuff. Let's be clear. It is not the content of Jesus that the disciples preached. It was the priorities of Jesus that the disciples preached. So again, it's not about learning words off a page. It is about absorbing priorities and values and commitments. And then you go out and train others to share those same priorities and commitments. That's stage 2. Stage 3 is the hands and the feet. You go somewhere and use your hands to do what Jesus did. In the Gospel of John, Jesus made one of the most extraordinary statements that I have ever heard in my life. Listen, truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these will he do, because I am going to the Father. What? Jesus seriously said, of all the things that I've done, the healing that I've done, the miracles I've done, the people I've touched, you're going to do greater things than those. Now, he's not talking about you dying for someone else's sin. That's not going to happen. He is talking about healing. Think about all the people that Jesus touched. Today, in the name of Jesus, through medicine, we have healed more people. We have done away with more diseases than Jesus ever dreamed of doing through his ministry. His treatment of children and women through orphanages and literacy programs and training programs and fighting against human trafficking. We have done more for women than Jesus ever did. We've done more for children than Jesus ever did. Through our efforts globally as a church, we have reached more ethnic groups than Jesus ever did. We've taught more literacy than Jesus ever did. What I'm saying to you is it's the priorities of Jesus that he's talking about here. That as an organization, whether you're a church or not, you might be a construction worker. You are going to build more homes for people than Jesus ever did. It is about helping people absorb and then actionize the priorities of Jesus Christ. And we actually see this from the Apostle Paul. This is the second discipleship practice that I want to talk about. Move leaders from teaching to coaching. Now, in the first stage of discipleship, we talked about moving from hearing to doing. You're moving your disciples from one thing to another. Now you're moving leaders. I want to move you as leaders from teachers to coaches. I've put in your notes a chart of the most famous mentor-mentee relationship in the New Testament. It's the Apostle Paul and young Timothy, who was his protege. I've done a lot of discipling over the years of young men. A lot of coffee shops, a lot of living room talks, a lot of walks, a lot of hikes, camping, that kind of thing. And I know, I know this field pretty well. And I know what people are asking for. And often young adults are asking for really more of an informal counseling session than actual mentoring or discipleship. They want to be listened to. They want to be understood. They want advice for life. All of that's good. It is not discipleship. If your disciples are apprentices to get stuff done, to carry out the priorities of Jesus in ministry, it's going to take more than a coffee and a conversation. And if you look at the lineage of Timothy with the Apostle Paul, you will find 4 separate stages. Often, and I know this is true because when I was a professor, students would say, well, I want to be like, I want to teach, I want to talk, I want to preach, I want to stand on stage. That is not what the essence of leadership in ministry is all about. The Apostle Paul took Timothy, and here's stage 1. He met him in Lystra. And Timothy, if you're not familiar with the Bible, this is kind of one of those intricate stories. Timothy's a young man whose mother was Jewish, father was a Greek, so he was not circumcised because he took his father's heritage, and yet from a Jewish perspective, you are the ethnicity of your mother. So he was Jewish by ethnicity, Greek by culture. If he's going to follow Paul, he's going to offend a lot of Jews because he didn't do one of the basic obligations of a Jew, to be circumcised. So here's a guy, I'm going to guess he's about 20 years old. I could be off by a year or two. He gets circumcised because Paul said, if you're going to follow me, you need to get circumcised so we don't offend people. And Timothy goes, okay. Now, granted, for a Greek, circumcision was offensive. Like, why would you mutilate that part of your body? But Timothy, because of his submission, knew that he had to submit to his leader, who is the Apostle Paul, in order to ultimately honor God. And a lot of people have this idea that I'm just going to honor God. I'm going to serve God. I'm not accountable to any human being. You cannot be in submission to God without being in submission to the leaders that he put you under. That's true for you. It is true for me. And we will excel with God to the extent that we submit to leaders. Well, what if my leader is not a godly man? Well, he doesn't have to be a good man to be a godly man. King David, would not raise a hand against Saul, not because he was a good man, because he was a godly man. Caiaphas, the high priest, the one who assassinated Jesus, he prophesied these words, such an important statement in John 11, one man must die for the nation. He didn't know what he was talking about, but he still prophesied. Why? Not because he was a good man, but because he was a godly man. I'm sorry, not because he was a godly man. He was God's man without being a godly man. We'll just leave it at that. Timothy understood that principle, and so he loyally submitted to the authority of the Apostle Paul. Stage 2, when he was in Troas, all he did was watch and listen, watch and listen, watch and listen. Now, this is important. What did he watch for? Primarily, the Apostle Paul taught him how to hear the voice of God. And if you teach your disciples anything, whether it's children or students that you're coaching or kids that you're leading in school, if you're not a Christian, this may not make sense to you, but if you are a Christian, the most important thing for you to train someone in is how to hear the voice of God. And if you aren't hearing God's voice, it will be impossible for you to teach others how to hear a voice that you do not listen to. So, stage 3, Philippi to Athens. All Timothy did, he's not taught once that we know of. He's not preached a single sermon that we know of. All he's done is carry Paul's bags. Stage 3, he goes from Philippi to Athens. Paul goes from Philippi to Athens. You know where Timothy goes? From Berea to Thessalonica, back to Berea, and then back to Philippi, and then back to Berea, and back to Philippi, and then to Athens. He's an errand boy. The letters that the Apostle Paul wrote, many in the New Testament, this cat would have to run to the city, take the letter to them. The church would offer an offering to Paul, and so he would carry that offering back to Paul. A young man wants to be with his mentor, wants to sit at his feet, wants to stand at his side. That's not discipleship. Discipleship is doing what the leader needs done in that moment. If you don't, you will never get to stage 4, and that's Corinth. Finally, at Corinth, after, a year and a half of following Paul, he finally joins Paul's teaching team. And then ultimately at Ephesus, young Timothy was the most famous preacher of the church of Ephesus, even though the Apostle Paul had been there, Priscilla and Aquila, probably the Apostle John, Mary, Jesus' mother, was there, a guy named Apollos. There's a string of very famous people that preached in Ephesus, but Timothy was the key pastor of that church, even at a young age. Why? Because he didn't skip stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. Discipleship, if you were discipling anyone, it is more about the assignments that you give them to action than what you teach them from the Bible. So here's master leader principle number 6. Our greatest mission is mentoring. Our greatest mission is mentoring. Now let me take off the professor hat for a second and put on the pastor's hat for a second. As a leader of the church, I want to ask you to evaluate, this is very, very important. How deep into the organization does your yes go? In other words, how many layers under you get to make formative decisions for the organization? Whether you're in a church, whether you're in a school, whether you're a team, whether you're a business, leadership drives the yes deeper into the organization because you have done all 4 stages of discipleship. And when you train your disciples to be doers and not thinkers, then you trust them to make the same decisions that you would make. Will they make mistakes? Yes. But if you're not releasing authority to others, then you are not maximizing the mission potential in your organization. And a lot of leaders misunderstand this. They think if I give away authority, I will have less. Never true. The more you give away authority, the more you raise your subordinates and give them authority to say yes, the higher you go, because it's like you're the ship that rises on this tide. And as you rise the tide of leadership in your organization, the higher you will go, the broader will be your mission accomplishment, and the deeper your leadership will run. So the more you empower others to say yes in the organization, to make decisions, to take risks, to follow the mission with the skills and gifts that they have, the more effective you're going to be as a leader. Now, how then do we accomplish this? I want to say one more thing about the Great Command. Jesus said to teach everything that I've commanded you. Okay, so what is that? Jesus gave a lot of commands. We don't have them all. But all of them that did make it into the New Testament, there are about 110 specific commands of Jesus. Do this or don't do that. I've counted them all, so trust me, I've read through every one. Here's what struck me. There are actually 5 categories of Jesus' command. Let's not make a checklist and go, okay, did you do that? Did you do that? Did you do that? Because it's not about programs. It's not about rules. It's about relationships. It's about people, not programs or processes. I want to know the priorities of Jesus, and the commands actually give us the priorities of Jesus. Here's number 1. Far and away, the most common command of Jesus is follow me. Just, that's it. It's a relationship. Be with me. 40 of the 110 commands are just about being with Jesus. Number 2, there's commands about religious piety, primarily how to pray. Again, it's relationship, not rules. Category number 3 is about money, being generous with others and trusting God. Again, it's about relationship, not about rules. Category number 4 is treatment of others. How do you treat lepers? How do you treat women? How do you treat children? In fact, Jesus said this. This is the most offensive thing that Jesus ever said. And remember, he's from the Middle East. So think Arab-Israeli relationship right now. Here's what Jesus said in that same geographic area. Love your enemies. And he's not talking about emotions. He's talking about do things that help your enemies. Clothing, food, housing. Well, what if I house a terrorist? Love your enemies. He is saying, straight-faced, that our treatment of others is his highest priority. Category number 5 is preaching and persecution. Giving the good news of Jesus to those who don't have it, regardless of the consequences to you. Now, looking at all of those commands of Jesus, one thing that strikes me, there's no prohibition against smoking or drinking or cussing. There's no rules about how many times you have to go to church or how many times you have to pray. In other words, the commands of Jesus don't revolve around rules of right and wrong. It's not about ethics and morality. It is about compassion for people. Understanding that from the last Great Commission, Matthew's the last Great Commission. There's also one in Mark and one in Luke and one in John, one in Acts. That's the last Great Commission. You know what the first Great Commission is? Luke chapter 4. Jesus shows up at his own hometown synagogue and he preaches this masterful sermon. It's based upon Isaiah 61. Jesus quotes that passage. Can I read it for you? The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Jesus' unique rendition of Isaiah 61, because he fiddled with the text a little bit, left a couple of lines out, inserted another line to say exactly what he wanted to say. And what you see is a program of compassion, social justice. That matches, like the social justice that Jesus began his ministry preaching. This is what I'm going to do. Proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, the sabbatical year of release of bonds, of freedom for everyone. That matches his last great commission, that his commands are not about what makes you more righteous, but what makes your neighbor safer, more loved, more helped, more included. Jesus is consistent through his entire ministry. His mission was about people, not programs. It was about helping people get connected to God and feel valued and worthy. Again, going back to our last lesson, the vision is to restore Eden. People are on that route to get there. This actually aligns, and you can read it in your notes, a couple of quotes from Qumran. If you're unfamiliar with that, there was a group of Jewish monastics, lived at the same time of Jesus, not in Jerusalem, out in the desert. Overlooking the Dead Sea, they had this little community there with lots and lots of scriptures. We actually found their library in 1948. It's an exciting archaeological find. And in that library, these 2,000-year-old scrolls say the same thing about Isaiah 61 that Jesus did, that the Messiah is going to come and bring justice. Only Jesus said, the Qumranites would never have said this, I am the fulfillment of that scripture. Okay, that leads to master principle number 7. I've already said it. Discipleship is people, not programs. So how are we going to get there? Here are 3 exercises that, coming out of this discussion, might help you master your mission. Number 1, assess your resources. Your mission doesn't have to be the same as the church up the street. In fact, it won't be. You need to ask, God, why did you put this candlestick in this place? So sit down and ask, what are the resources that I have? Financial resources, human resources, geographic resources. What does our building look like? What's the location of our building? If you're not a preacher, you could do this with your business. If you're a teacher, you could do this with your school. If you're a coach, you could do this with your team. What are the resources that God has put together? Now, given those resources, including your own personality and propensity, like it or not, you're not going to attract who you want. You're going to attract who you are. So don't try to be someone else. What could God do with your organization at this place at this time? And do not ask, what do we not have? That's the wrong question. Because great innovation always comes from just this driving need and a gap. If you I don't have the resources to meet this need. I don't have the people to meet this need. I don't have the structure to meet this need. In the gap is innovation. And your greatest mission is in the gap of the greatest need that just breaks your heart. What keeps you up late at night? That tells you what breaks your heart. What gets you up in the morning? That tells you what drives your day. You combine those 2 things, put that in the gap between the need that you sense and the resources you don't have, and that's where your greatest mission and innovation is going to be. So, what kind of a church are you going to build? What kind of business are you going to build to meet a need of people? It's not about programs. It is about people. Who breaks your heart? What breaks your heart in their lives? That is likely your mission. Exercise number 2. Identify your ministry priority. Given what breaks your heart, given what wakes you up in the morning, what's your priority? So here's an exercise, pretty simple. Whether it's a business, a school, or a ministry, write down all the things you do. Got to put it on a piece of paper. You got to put it on a piece of paper. Now, rearrange it according to your priority. As a leader, what's your priority? 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, in a couple of columns to the left, I want you to write what percentage of your budget goes to each item and what percentage of your time goes to each item. And then you might also put the personnel in there. Are my best people working on my greatest priorities? You might find that your best people are working on priority number 6 or 7. This is so valuable. and this is not original with me, this is just organizational principles, less is more. The fewer things you do, the better you will be at them. So honestly, if you have 7 ministries in your church, that's too many. Probably 3, maybe 4, but you're only going to be really good at 1 or 2 of them. And so if you're spending half of your resources on a 4 or 5 priority, no wonder you're not getting your mission accomplished. So this simple exercise, listing your activities and then ranking them according to your priority, and then telling how much money and how much time you spend with each, that is going to tell you what you need to change. Now, change is difficult. My guess, this is just an estimate, is that 70% of your resources, both human and material, need to go to one thing. Whatever that one thing is for you, your business, your family, your church, 70% of your time and resources should go to the one thing that you do best. And your other 30% of your resources should be distributed to the other 2, maybe 3 priorities that you have. If you look at this list and say, we are out of balance, only you can change that. Only you can change that. It's going to cost you if you change that, because every change you make takes from your ministry account. Like, we all have this invisible ministry bank account. Every change you make costs you. But if you don't make the change, you are going to go bankrupt slowly. So it would be unwise to make so many changes that you get fired. But if you don't make changes, your best resources will leach out and human resources will walk away, because nobody wants to work at an ineffective organization. So as quickly as you can, move your human and financial and physical resources towards your primary priorities. Number 1 in particular, number 2 and 3 following. Here's exercise number 3. Think like an owner. Simple exercise, everybody can do this. Most of you are not the singular leaders of your organization, because there's only a fractional few at the top of the pyramid. If you're a 2nd level manager, 3rd level manager, it's easy to say, not my decision, not my problem. But what if you were the owner? What if you were working on the business and not for the business? How would you act differently? As you begin to act in that way, you will find that you are more effective in accomplishing your mission. So I would just ask you to sit down or maybe walk around your organization with a clipboard and a piece of paper and just say, if I owned this, what would be different? If I were the owner, how would I be different? How would we operate differently? And it comes down to something as simple as picking up trash. If you don't pick up trash because it's someone else's job, then you're an employee, you're not an owner. There are hundreds of other applications we could give, but I think that makes the point sufficiently well. Act like an owner, and you will accomplish more of your mission. Thank you for listening. We'll see you for the next round.